We have been talking about suffering for the last few weeks, and we noted that suffering comes about because we live in a fallen and imperfect world. And because of that, sometimes bad things just happen. You know, you can't control it. You can't control flu season. That happens when it happens. Sometimes you catch a cold. Sometimes you get pricked by a thorn. It's not necessarily because of anything that anyone specifically has done, but sometimes we suffer because of what we do. Sometimes we end up hurting ourselves. Sometimes we make bad choices that impact us for a very long time and impact beyond ourselves to others as well. And sometimes because of our sinful actions, the Lord chastises us and He corrects us and He disciplines us. And then sometimes you have people who hurt us. Sometimes they hurt us unintentionally. Sometimes they hurt us with intention. And you can't control what other people are going to do. You can't control other people's decisions. We have this thing called free will. And we love it when we get to use our free will for our benefit, but when someone uses their free will in a way that negatively impacts me, all of a sudden it becomes a problem. And whether it's with intention or by accident, we can't control what other people do, but we can control how we choose to respond to it. And the Bible teaches us how we are to respond to it. This morning, we're going to look at the upside of suffering. Say, well, hang on a second. Upside of suffering? I didn't realize there was such a thing. Yes, there is. And that is when you suffer with a purpose. Many years ago, about 20 years ago now, 25 years ago, a missionary had been called to go to Nigeria and found an orphanage there. Among the first kids that they took in were two brothers and a sister. Those kids, by the way, grown up now. They were very young when they were taken in. But those kids are from the north part of Nigeria. I'm going to tell you more about one of them later on in this message. But they come from a very, very difficult background. The sister was born with HIV. The oldest of the two brothers, being from the north part of Nigeria, where the Boko Haram and the Islamic extremists are at, he watched as the Islamists beheaded his father. And he had to flee for his very life to the south of the country. You wonder, what purpose is there in that? I think by the time we're finished this morning, you may begin to understand and see the hand of God working. But if you have your Bibles, join with me in the book of John chapter 9 this morning. Because this question of suffering was posed to Jesus. In John chapter 9, it says, as he, this is speaking of Jesus, passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, it is not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. So you have Jesus, and this is near Jerusalem, at Jerusalem, that they encounter this man. He was blind from birth, and the disciples see him there on the side of the road begging. He's a full-grown adult. And the disciples kind of like kids. They apparently didn't have much of a filter on them. You know how kids will see someone different at the store or something and very loudly proclaim and point that person out? Apparently that's kind of what these guys did. Jesus, this guy here is blind. Whose fault is it? Did this guy do something wrong, or did his parents do something wrong? But I want you to understand, first and foremost, this wonderful principle that everyone endures suffering, and while everyone endures suffering, God can and does use that suffering for a greater purpose. In other words, suffering is not necessarily just a random event that occurs in life. And it is not outside of the power and will and control of God. He takes suffering that people endure and He uses it for something bigger, something better, something greater. And He can do that for various reasons. Sometimes our suffering may benefit Him and may benefit the work that He is doing. Sometimes our suffering may benefit others, or it might be a combination of this. In this particular story, you've probably heard it before, but let me kind of give you a rundown of what happens through most of the rest of this chapter. So Jesus, after He tells them that this is because of God's glory, He bends down, He spits in the dirt, He makes a mud pack and puts it on the guy's eyes. And He tells the man, He says, get up and go to the pool of Siloam and wash there, and your eyesight will be restored. The man gets up, he goes, he does what Jesus says, he washes, and his eyesight is restored. And everyone starts seeing him, and they're quite used to him because he's a beggar that they see and that they encounter every day. And the debate begins, hey, he looks like that blind beggar. Well, that guy, it can't be him because that beggar has been blind from birth. He just must really, really, really look like him. And the now healed man says, no, it's me. I'm that person. Well, this is crazy. This is strange. This is weird. We better go talk to the Pharisees because people who are blind just don't suddenly become able to see. So they go to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, they bring this man in. And they start asking him, okay, what happened? And they're especially concerned because this man's sight was restored to him on the Sabbath day. And he tells them, he says, I was there begging, and this guy comes up to me, he spit in the dirt, made this mud pack, put it on my eyes. He told me to go wash. And when I washed, I was able to see. And the Pharisees they're struggling with this. They're having a hard time with this because on one hand, this is clearly a miraculous event. This guy is very familiar. He's very well known as a beggar, as a blind beggar. There's never been any question about him being blind. And so, on one hand, you have this miracle that's been performed. On the other, it happened on the Sabbath day. And the person who performed the miracle, man, he worked on the Sabbath day. You're not supposed to do that. And so they're struggling and they have this guy explain what happened over and over again. And finally they're like, okay, we need to verify this guy's story. So they go and they have his parents brought in. And they drag this guy's parents in and they ask him, is this your son? Was he born blind? And if he was in fact born blind, how is it that he's able to see? And the parents say, yes, this is our son. Yes, he was born blind. But if you want to know how it is that he's able to see, ask him. He's a grown-up. And so they ask the guy again. They tell him, you need to give glory to God for this, because clearly this is God who did this, but you need to renounce the person who did it, because he did it on the Sabbath day. And his response comes back. He says, listen, he says, why do you keep asking me the same question over and over again? Are you wanting to be his disciples as well? And they get all huffy about that and basically kick him out. They say, okay, fine, you're done, you're out, no more synagogue for you, no more temple for you, because you stood up for Jesus. And you pick up in verse number 35, and it says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. And he said, Lord, I believe, and worshiped him. And so here you have this beautiful idea, because the Jews, they had this, they viewed all suffering as in either one of two things happen, and you can see this in the initial question that the disciples asked Jesus. They believe that if a person is suffering, if a person has any type of ailment or affliction, they either did something, they either sinned to cause that, or mom and dad sinned, and the mom and dad are being punished by their child having some sort of affliction or ailment. That is how they always viewed all types of suffering. That it is someone did something wrong, and now you're suffering for it, most likely you or your parents. But in this particular case, what happened? Jesus says, no, this man's, he's not blind, he has not suffered his entire life because of anything that he did or because of anything that his parents did. He has suffered for the glory of God. So how does this fall out? Well, this man comes to know Jesus Christ. You continue to follow and trace the rest of the story out. This guy goes around and starts telling everyone that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God, and he restored my sight. I was blind, now I can see. His suffering was not because of anything that he did wrong, anything that his parents did. It was because God chose to use him to bring about something good. Because God chose to use him to benefit both himself and others, so that they would know the Messiah, so that they would be saved. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 11, we read this, for the moment all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. In other words, now this is written concerning the discipline of God on his children, but he says, listen, no one likes it when they're getting the spanking. No one likes it when God disciplines. But later, down the road, not necessarily at this moment that you're suffering, not necessarily at this moment in which things are in which you're going through the hard times, but maybe down the road there is a benefit. There's the fruit of righteousness, the maturity, the growing up. Because this is the way in which God works. This is the way that God has designed you to work and has designed me to work. The reality is, we were all created to require adversity in order to grow. For us to grow, you have to have adversity. You have to have hardships. You have to have difficulties. Physically speaking. I mean, we talk about kids going through growing pains. It is pain caused as the cells divide, as they expand, as the skeletal structure matures. Think about the professional athlete. Yes, they may have been born with certain talents, but to be able to get to the point to where those football players can be tackled by 300-pound linemen, that takes some training. That takes a lot of hard work. That takes some suffering in order to get to the place to where you're physically able to endure. Mentally, we require adversity. We require challenges to grow mentally. To become proficient at reading, you have to practice. You have to struggle. Sometimes you have to struggle with learning how to figure out what a word's supposed to sound like when you read it. You start with the letters and you progress through sentence structure and vocabulary. Mathematics. For some people, mathematics are really big suffering. But you start by learning your numbers. And then what is it that the math teachers do, that horrible thing that they do? Is they give you homework. And they send you home to practice solving math problems. Mentally, to develop mentally, you have to struggle. You have to go through some difficulties. You need that adversity. Emotionally, the same thing. To grow up emotionally, you need adversity. A person who never faces any challenges in life emotionally until they become an adult, they become completely incapable of functioning. And spiritually, the same is true. Faith does not come about because you sit down and say, well, I decide I'm going to believe in God. No, faith grows when we are placed in a position to where we have to believe in God. You never know faith without having to trust in Him. You will never know peace until you're in the storm. Not really. When everything is good, when everything is settled, when everything seems wonderful in life, you can talk about how I am experiencing peace. But you won't know the peace of God without the storm. You will never know the joy that only God can give without the sorrow. Because again, it's very, very easy, it's very simple in the good times when everything is right, when everything is perfect, to be able to say, you know what? I am so joyful today. Turn it around when everything is falling apart. Joy is a little bit harder to come by. But you will never know the joy of the Lord and truly understand the joy of the Lord without the sorrow. I mean, look at David. David, the greatest king that Israel ever had. A man that God described as a man after my own heart. Why was David such a great king? What made David a great king? It wasn't because David just had it in him. What made David a great king is spending years fighting lions and bears, protecting sheep, and running from Saul and having to care for those people under him. That's what made David a great king. David was forged to be a great king through the hardships of life. That's true of us as well. Because God wants you to be more. He wants you to be greater. He wants you to have a greater faith, a deeper relationship with Him. He wants you to know His peace even more. He wants you to know His joy even more. He wants you to live a more righteous life. And for that to happen, there needs to be some growing pains. So the question is, okay, if I need suffering in my life, if I need challenges, if I need adversity in my life in order to grow and become the person that God would have me to be, how do I handle it? How do I deal with suffering? Well, I think to answer that question, you have to ask the question, how was Christ able to deal with the storms and crisis with such calm and peace? How is it that when He and the disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee and a storm came up, and how was Jesus able to sleep in the back of the boat while the disciples said, we're all going to die? The answer is not necessarily what you expect it to be. In Luke chapter 22, we read this beginning in verse number 39. It says, and He came out, this is speaking of Jesus, and went, as was His custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed Him. And when they came to the place, He said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And He withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to Him an angel from heaven, strengthening Him. And being in agony, He prayed more earnestly, and sweat became like great drops of blood falling down onto the ground. So here's what's happening. This happens just the night before Jesus is crucified. He and the disciples, they go to the garden. This was Jesus' normal custom. He would go there every night when He was in Jerusalem. He would go there every night to pray. And notice what He does. He gets there and He tells the disciples, you need to pray so that you don't fall into temptation. In other words, Jesus He gives them a straight up warning. You are about to be tempted. You are about to go through some struggles. You are about to go through some hard times. You are about to go through some suffering and through some fear. And you need to prepare for that by praying. And then Jesus, because He knows what's about to happen. He knows that Judas will be showing up shortly with the temple guard. He knows that he is going to be arrested. He knows that he is going to be assaulted. He knows that he is going to be crucified. He falls down and he prays, not so much that he won't suffer, but he prays to bring His will in line with the Father's so that He can endure the suffering that God is about to bring. Because for Jesus, every time that Jesus was going to go through a hardship, Jesus knew it was coming. Because Jesus, being God, knows everything, including the future. He knew every time what was about to happen. So what did Jesus do every time that He was about to face suffering and face adversity? He prayed. He prepared for it. Because the hardest part is not necessarily the suffering, but the prayer life in preparation for it. And so we have to learn to prepare for suffering, not react to it. You say, well, yes, but Jesus is God. He knows what's coming. In this room this morning, looking around, you know what I see? Grown-ups, adults. I don't see any little kids in here. Why is that important? Because by this point in time in your life, you have probably figured out that life works in cycles. Meaning this: there are times that we go through suffering, there are times that we go through hardship, there are times that we go through difficulties. Those times will come to an end, and we will go through times of peace. And those times of peace will come to an end, and we will go back into times of suffering. You may not know exactly what's coming up. You may not know exactly when it's coming up. But you are either in that place to where you are suffering currently, you are coming out of a time of suffering, or you are preparing to go into a time of suffering. Because that is the cycle that this life works in. Our problem is that we think, I just need to wait until the next cycle comes, and when the next cycle comes, then I'm going to react to it. We are very reactionary by nature. If you notice, Jesus, here in Luke, he is not being reactionary. He is being preparatory. He is preparing for what is going to come. He's not waiting for it to come. He's not waiting until he gets arrested and he gets before Caiaphas and the high priest, and then he starts praying, okay, Father, help me to get through this. He is praying in advance. He is preparing in advance. Our problem is that we oftentimes wait for the storms to show up, and then we say, now I need to anchor. Max Lucado tells a story about when he was a young adult. And he and some of his friends, they ended up living on a houseboat down in Florida. And a warning came out that there was a hurricane that was going to be coming within the next few days. And he and his friends, they did not grow up on the sea. They did not grow up around boats. And what Max Lucado says is that they went and they got as many ropes as they could, and they tied it to everything on land that they could find. And this old fisherman came over and saw what they had done. This spider web of ropes coming off of this houseboat. And he told him, he said, if you do this, your boat's going to be destroyed. You need to go and anchor it deep, if you want the boat to be saved. You can't anchor when the storm comes. You have to anchor before the storm arrives. You have to prepare for the storm before it gets there. And we begin to anchor ourselves through prayer. We begin to anchor ourselves as we bring our will in line with His. And we learn to submit and say, Thy will, not mine, be done. And we anchor to His plan and His purpose, not our expectations. We survive the storms. But if you wait until you're in the middle of the storm, you're already too late. You're already going to be sunk. In Genesis 50, Joseph, and we talked about him last week, Joseph meets with his brothers. Their father has just died, and the brothers have said, okay, well, Joseph, we treated Joseph terribly. We beat him up, we threw him in a pit, and we sold him into slavery. And we're scared now that the only thing, and he's now the number 2 guy in Egypt, and we're scared that he is going to, now that Jacob's dead, now that Dad's dead, that he is going to go on ahead and get his revenge on us. And so they come into Jacob and they say, Jacob, please forgive us. This was Dad's final wish, that you forgive us. And anything that we need to do to get your forgiveness, we'll do. And Joseph's response in verse number 20 is this. He says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. You hurt me. You beat me up, you threw me in a pit, you sold me into slavery. You meant to do me harm. But you see, God had a bigger purpose. God took what you did, which was evil, and He took that evil and He flipped it on its head so that today I can save your lives, the lives of your families, that you can be protected and be kept safe. I don't hold a grudge against you for what you've done because I see what God has done. Because my suffering was something that God used for your benefit and for His glory. Now let me bring you back to Him. This is Simdat. Simdat is the one who watched his father be beheaded. This picture was taken in 2017 at the dedication of when A Place of Hope in Africa built their facility. Simdat that day shared his testimony, told this story. He was about 17 when this picture was taken. Like I said, he was one of the first kids at APOA, at Place of Hope in Africa. He grew up in that orphanage. He came to know Jesus Christ as his Savior in that orphanage. Today, let me tell you where Simdat is at. He is in North Nigeria as a missionary in the village that he came from, telling the same people who beheaded his father about Jesus Christ. They meant it for evil. They meant to hurt. But God took this young man, saved him, and made him a missionary. The question is not, why do we suffer? The question is, in the end, Lord, use this time of suffering, use this hardship in my life to do something bigger, something greater than myself.